Thank everybody for being here. Okay, I got it. Thank you. Yeah, thanks so much for being here today. Lauren Elle, I'd like to thank you certainly for doing this for us. And want to take just a moment here to thank Randy too, because back in September, he suggested we get in touch with you. And apparently around that time, you had been in touch with him because he had some of the Colwell hand letter. He knew that you were finishing up your master's project around that time. And so it worked out really well for us. And so thanks, Randy. We appreciate you giving us a heads up here. Lauren Elle is a student at the English department in the University of British Columbia. And as part of her master's project, she created Women's Type, early women type designers in the 20th century book history. And I was just telling her before we all got here how much I have enjoyed looking at the PDF of the book. And so in addition to the research and her writing, it also includes a portfolio of 5 type specimens, that some of which Lauren Elle printed and some were printed by others. But the whole project is just really well done and really interesting. So I'll turn it over to you, and you can give us everything there is to know about the project.
Thank you, Chris. Yeah, well, we'll touch on really a sliver of the research today, but I'm happy to answer any questions. And the first thing I'll do is put in the chat a link to my the kind of digitized version of the project that I sent in for assessment by my committee, and that's available for anyone to download and look at if they want to follow up with any of the information available here. And then the first thing that I wanted to do, even before I get into an introduction of myself, is actually just show you the project, because it's all done now. So this is the project. So it's a folder. It's called A Woman's Type, Early Women Type Designers in 20th Century Book History. This is a lino cut image on the cover that was designed by Stephanie Williams, and this is calligraphy done by Renee Alexander. And when you open it up, on the inside is the essay on the, I think that would be the left, and then the type specimens on the right-hand side. And there's a colophon in there that gives a little bit more information about the project. So I just wanted to show you that so you can kind of have an image of your head of what the project is. And then I will also say that there are going to be, it's an edition of 20, and those are gift copies that'll be sent to participating kind of institutions and libraries and individuals. And one of the copies will be going to my university library with the goal of digitizing it and sharing it online, open access, free to the public, so anyone can look at it. And they do a really beautiful job with their digitization. So so it will be very pleasurable to look at on that platform. And then the other thing I wanted to mention is that I will send the slides for this presentation after. So if it feels like I'm kind of breezing through things a little bit, you can always reference back to that if you need to. Yeah, and so with that, I think I will, I think, George, you'll need to enable me to share my screen so I can share my slides.
Okay, you're set.
Okay, here we go. Okay, so is this visible?
Yes.
Just 1 second here, sorry. Just want to make sure you can see the whole thing. Okay, so that should be nice and big on your screens, full screen. So I'll start with a little bit of information about me, particularly at the, the request of Chris. He thought it might be nice to hear a little bit more about my background and how I came to letterpress printing. So yes, I am a writer and researcher, and I consider myself to be a novice printer. I don't get into the print shop as much as I would like to, unfortunately. But I started printing in undergrad. So I did my bachelor's degree in writing and literature at Naropa University, which, as a kind of interesting aside, was started by a Tibetan Buddhist, Chogyam Trungpa, and the beat poet Allen Ginsberg in the 70s. And is in fact an accredited institution. I just like to mention that. And they do have the Harry Smith print shop there. And so you can take courses, a letterpress course as an elective, as a student at Naropa. And that's what I did. And that was kind of my first entry into letterpress printing. And I was very hooked from day one. And when I moved to Canada in 2015, one of the first things that I did, I'll just say that's a picture of the Harry Smith print shop down there on the bottom right. So when I moved to Canada in 2015, one of the first things that I did was look for somewhere to continue doing that letterpress work. And I was able to find a man named Lloyd Bocott in Shirley, BC, which is this little town out by the ocean and in the middle of the forest and on Vancouver Island here where I live. And we kind of agreed to a work trade, and so I started working and printing there sort of part-time with him. And that's me at the top right in the print shop there at Cook Kettle Press, and that was when we were working on the belladonna specimen for this project. Oh yeah, so actually, my dad sent me this photo while we were signing on, so that's why this is kind of roughly thrown in here. But I wanted to share it because this is the first thing that I ever printed, and this was my final project for the class that I took at Naropa when I first got into letterpress printing. And I asked my dad this morning if he could find it, and he sent me the picture right as we were signing on to this meeting. So I had to just toss this in there, but it's a Bob Marley song, lyrics from a Bob Marley song that I printed. Gosh, this must have been 2011 or 2012. Yeah, so about the project itself. So I started working on this project. Well, the kind of inception of it was when I was printing my second poetry chapbook at Cook Kettle Press. And the project had been really influenced by a lot of people who at the time all identified as women. And I really wanted to use a typeface that was designed by a woman to print the covers of the book. And so that, of course, led me to ask, what are the typefaces that were designed by women? And that question was actually a lot harder to answer than I thought it was going to be. I thought a quick Google search would kind of give me a comprehensive list. But a lot of the lists were about women type designers more generally, not specific to those who designed metal typeface that could be used for letterpress printing. And this Alphabets article by Indra Kupferschmidt, first early female type designers, was kind of my entryway into my research. So that's kind of what I had found to be the best resource at the time, but it wasn't comprehensive. But from that resource, I found a Colwell hand letter, a set of Colwell hand letter italic on eBay, and I purchased it for about $80 US. And that's what I used to print the covers that you see on the right-hand side there. And then when I started my English master's degree at the University of Victoria, this project became my master's project, and it sort of snowballed, as a lot of projects do, it took on a life of its own. And I just wanted to mention, I won't go through this whole list. When I was practicing this presentation, I realized it was a little bit longer than I meant it to be, but like I said, I will send the slides, so if you want to follow up on anything. My project is certainly not the first to study this topic of women in print and women type designers. There's a whole lineage of interest in this subject, and so here's just a very, very select few number of projects in the field. I'm going to breeze right through this one. So I'll start by saying what the project is. So it's an illustrated biographical sketches of 10 women who designed metal typefaces prior to the advent of computers, that should say. Not prior to the advent of printing, that would be kind of wild. But so what the project does is it gives a brief description of their typefaces, including some light art historical context or sociological context. And then it also talks about possibilities for how contemporary printers and designers can use them today. It also includes, as Chris mentioned, brand new specimens of 5 of these historical typefaces that are printed. 2 of them are printed by me, 1 by Leonard C. Stone of Tideline Press, 1 by Jen Farrell of Starshaped Press in Chicago, and then 1 by Tim Dunn of Moonstruck Press. And so the goals of the project, what you can see here on the right-hand side is one of the pages from the essay that I wrote. And the goal of the project is to highlight and share the history of early women type designers, but also to generate a renewed interest in their work, to show how it might be brought into contemporary print shops and design studios. And it also has this goal of kind of laying a foundation for further study on gender in the history of type design. And that kind of leads me into what this project is not. So it's not a study of, oh, I think maybe I should hide that. That might be a little bit better for you there. I had the gallery on the right-hand side, and so maybe now I've minimized that. So the project is not a study of how these women's type design practices or the conditions of their work were different than men. So it's not a study of the gendered nature of their work. I mean, I do get into that a little bit, but it's not in a comprehensive way. So my hope is really to kind of provide a baseline foundation of information that researchers can use to do that kind of work. So I wanted to give you my definition of early women type designers. So for my purposes, early women type designers are women who designed alphabetic typefaces that were cast into metal by commercial foundries prior to the widespread use of computers and design software. And so they produced their typefaces roughly in the period 1910 to 1960. So this definition does unfortunately come with some exclusions. It only includes women who were attributed with a typeface. And I go into detail about this a little bit more in my paper, but women who had a hand in the design of a typeface but weren't attributed with it aren't included. So that includes Anna Simons, Bertha Gowdy, and as well as the women who worked as clerks in the linotype and monotype drawing offices in Britain in the 20th century. It also excludes women who design ornaments, letterpress ornaments, and it excludes metal type that was designed after the advent of computers. So that would be something like this picture on the right-hand side here. This is the typeface Pilot, which was designed by Alexandra Semyolenkova. And this was, it won the student type design competition in 2013 and was cast into metal by Ed Rayer of Swamp Press, which is incredibly cool, but it is excluded from my definition of women type designers. And if you're interested into why I've kind of created that boundary, I do talk about it a little bit more in my paper, but to give you just a kind of a brief overview, it's essentially I wanted to focus on this era of type design that occurred sort of at the point when the craft of type design became more of an industry, and in the early 1900s, and then capping it at that point when more digital technologies started to come into play. And also, just as a letterpress printer, I really like old things, so I wanted to look at that specific area as well. So just a general kind of snapshot overview of the women from kind of a macro level here. These are their names, and there's 10 women that I studied. And I will say that this is just to the best of my current knowledge. As more information is digitized and put online, and things are coming to light every single day, and so it's very possible that more women's names will come to the surface as having designed the typeface. I think it's interesting to note the places of birth. So on the little pie chart there, you can see that most of them are from Germany. One is from the US, one is from Russia, which is a little cut off there, one from Poland, and then two are unknown. They were working in Germany, so I think they were born in Germany, but I'm not 100% sure. And then this little word cloud here is kind of my way of speaking to this key piece of information related to this, which is that some people might take issue with even the fact that I sort of refer to these women as type designers, because technically they're more their career revolved around other professions more so than it did type design. So most of them only designed maybe one or two typefaces. So they wouldn't really be considered what we might call career type designers. And this was something that was kind of brought to my attention by Jerry Kelly. But as you can see in the word cloud there, most of their career was focused on graphic design, lettering, being a teacher. Some of them were typographers. A lot of them were artists. So two that were career type designers were Galina Andreevna Banikova, and she's the Russian designer, as well as Gudrun Zapp-von-Hess, who I'm sure many of you know. The Rochester Institute of Technology has a very large collection related to the Zoffs, and she would also be someone that would be considered a career type designer, a substantial proportion of her career dedicated to that work. And then this is just a brief overview of their typefaces. So there are 15 typefaces here. And actually there's one more which isn't included here, which is Hess Antiqua, and that's a titling face that Gudrun Zapp-von-Hess designed. Interestingly, she also cut the punches for that type herself in brass, which wasn't very common for a woman to be able to do at the time. So it's sort of an interesting fact. Most of them are text faces. You can see in the pie chart there on the right-hand side. Although, of course, a text face can be used as a display face, just depending on your design preferences. There's a really beautiful selection of ornamental or swash capitals. And then there's also, excuse me, one uncial-based typeface and two black letter typefaces, although one of them is sort of more a mix between a black letter and a more classic Roman typeface. So the bulk of my research related to one of the designers, Elizabeth Colwell. She's born first among all these women. And I do have like a lot of biographical information about her here. She lived a very interesting life. But I think for the sake of time, I'm gonna skip over this, although maybe we can revisit it at the end if there's interest. And I'll go straight into her typeface. So Elizabeth Colwell designed Colwell hand letter and italic, and it was issued by the American Type Founders Company in 1916. So Elizabeth Colwell is the one American typeface designer included in my study. And I should also mention that she's the only known American woman typeface designer of her generation. And her typeface is a Jensen style typeface. And this style of typeface saw a resurgence in popularity in the early 20th century. And these typefaces take their inspiration from the 15th century Venetian printer Nicholas Jensen. And these typefaces evoke the human touch of handwritten forms while retaining a uniformity and evenness that keeps them very, exceptionally legible. So there was some mixed reception to Colwell's typeface. By 1955, it was no longer cast. And Greg Walters explained to me that it was likely discontinued when the Depression hit because it's not in ATF's 1934 or 1941 specimen books, but it did sell well enough to be included in their 1923 specimen book. And this photo on the right-hand side is a picture from the 1923 specimen book. And some things that I love about this typeface, of course, the calligraphic influence I think is really beautiful. And I also really like how, it kind of evokes that the human hand, the imperfections of letters written by hand. So for example, one example of that is that there's a wide variety in how the ending strokes of the letters are created. So some of them kind of taper, some of the letters sort of taper smoothly. Some of them have like a teardrop or a ball shaped ending, and some of them have more abrupt, like rectangular serifs. And I really like this variety, and but in my readings I found that some people didn't like it. They thought it was a bit gaudy or unattractive. And I know Randy Newcomer, who's here, has a nice family of this font. So maybe at the end he can tell us what he thinks about it. I wanted to mention that extant fonts can be found on eBay occasionally. That's how I purchased mine. And I recently saw one for sale by Daniel Morris of the Arm Letterpress in Brooklyn. I also wanted to mention that, oh yes, and on the top right there, there's a picture of Randy's mini book that he printed called Thoreau's Library. I also wanted to mention that I know that the Chesapeake chapter has connections with the Smithsonian American History Museum, and as some of you know, they do have letterpress materials, and so I was able to connect with Theo Rehack, who was a type founder for the American Type Founders, and Greg Walters and Joan Boudreau, who works at the Smithsonian. And they helped me string together kind of this story about the Colwell hand letter matrices and drawings. So when the ATF plant closed in 1993, many of their obsolete matrices landed at the Smithsonian, and this included many sizes of Colwell's design. And when I contacted Joan at the museum, they had recently been recatalogued and rehoused, and there are some really great photos of all the matrices and drawings that they have on the Smithsonian's website. The last thing I wanted to mention was I know that many people use photopolymer plates in their printing. And one possibility for using this typeface in contemporary print shops is by reviving it and creating a new digital version of it that could be used to create photopolymer plates. Earlier this year, I was contacted by Carla Paston, she's a designer based in Mexico City, and she was taking the Type West program at the Letterform Archive in San Francisco. And she asked me for some high resolution images of the type itself and the specimens. And she created a beautiful typeface that I was able to use for the cover of my essay booklet, which you see in the photo there. And the typeface that Carla created isn't available for purchase publicly, but you never know if you send her an email. And yes, like I said, these digital versions can be used to create photopolymer plates, which can be used for letterpress printing. So the main focus of my project is Elizabeth Colwell, but I wanted to mention a couple of other designers because I think that their stories are, their stories are really interesting, but also I wanted to touch on how their typefaces might be used in contemporary print shops. So some of you may have heard of Elizabeth Friedlander. She designed Elizabeth Roman and Italic for the Bauer Type Foundry in 1938. And this type specimen on the right-hand side is one that Jen Farrell printed for the project. And Jen has a large family of the Elizabeth type. I won't go too much into Elizabeth Friedlander's biography herself, but Incline Press published a working biography of Friedlander, and there's a link to it there. And through my project, we were able to acquire a copy. My university library was able to acquire a copy and digitize it and put it online free for the public to view. So that link there links to the digitization. I also wanted to mention that Friedlander also designed a set of initials, and this was through private commission. And recently, Ed Rayer of Swamp Press was able to use images of the initials to recreate matrices of them and cast new type. So that is available for printers to purchase and use today. And so on the right-hand side there, you can see the specimen that Grand Moss of Incline Press printed to announce this newly cast type of the Friedlander initials. Another one that I wanted to mention was the Ballet initials by Maria Ballet. And Maria Ballet is one of the type designers that I have less information about, but interestingly enough, I was able to acquire a font of these initials, and I'll tell a little bit about that story. So I'm just going to read this. I'll do a little, like a mini reading from my essay that goes into this story a bit. I think for the printers in the room, it'll be a particularly interesting tale. So unlike the other typefaces studied in this paper, the Ballet initials were not cast in lead as foundry type, but rather in copper as electros, or galvanos in German. Until recently, I wasn't aware of any extant fonts of the Ballet initials, but in March of 2021, New York City's Bound & Co. printers shared a photo of their collection of the Ballet initials on social media, and that's the picture on the top right there. It turns out they don't have a full font, and it may be the case that Bauer sold the design letter by letter. As Andy Bursch of Woodside Press explained to me, if you were setting an 11-chapter book that specified a Ballet initial for the first paragraph of each chapter, you might only order the letters you needed for that book. That could have been 11 letters, but you might also only order 7 if 5 of the chapters started with T, for example. So this might explain how Bow & Co. printers came to have just a selection of the initials, but the plot thickens. It turns out that at some point in the 1950s to 1970s, at least 2 matrices of the Ballet initials were custom engraved for the Ludlow line casting machine. As Davin Kuntz of Woodside Press explained to me, the Ludlow company often made custom matrices for clients, although it was quite expensive. And the Ballet matrices came to be in the possession of Don Black, who ran a Toronto line casting business for many years. And at the time of writing, Don Black still holds one set of the Ballet initials Ludlow matrices, and another is owned by Geoff Moore of Vintage Services in Australia. And so full sets of the Ballet initials were cast using these Ludlow matrices, and Tim Dunn of Moonstruck Press owned 2 sets, and he sold one to me for this project, so that's how I came to own it. And he also printed the Ballet initial specimen for this project as well. And then I'll also mention that Highlands Printing and Publishing in Ontario also owns a set of the initials, and there might be other extant sets as well. And on the bottom right there, you'll see the digital version that was created by Andreas Siedel. I think it's a really beautiful revival of this typeface. And again, this is something that could be used to create photopolymer plates to print with, or it could be used to, for digital designs. So next, I'm going to take you through sort of a whirlwind tour of the other typefaces that were designed by women in the early 20th century. And I'll just give you kind of their names and images of them just to kind of pique your interest. And if any of them sort of capture your imagination, you can kind of So this is Belladonna. It was created by Hildegard Henning, circa 1911, 1912. It was issued by the J. Klinkert Foundry in Germany. This is Thomas Schrift and Thomas Versalian. And so Versalian means, to my understanding, capitals in German. So this was created by Friedel Thomas, issued by VEB Typo Art in 1958. And so the top picture is a specimen from the Encyclopedia of Typefaces, and that's Thomas's design. And this is that Uncial-based typeface that I mentioned at the beginning. So you can see that it's sort of inspired by that style. And then on the bottom are 2 digital versions of this typeface. So again, those would be something that would be available to create photopolymer plates from. Stam is a Hebrew typeface that was designed by Franziska Baruch in the mid-1920s and issued by Berthold Type Foundry. Banikova is a text face that was designed by Galina Andreevna Banikova and issued in 1949 by the Type Foundry Polygraph Match. Is a Cyrillic face. And there is a digital version of this as well that is sold by Paratype. And they also have Paratype's designers created a free open source font that's kind of in the same lineage, in the same realm as this typeface. And that is what we use to set the type for the essay booklet for my project. This is Rhapsody by Ilse Schul. This was issued by Ludwig and Meyer in 1951, and it was issued with a set of swash capitals. You can see the regular kind of typeface at the top there, and then the swash capitals at the bottom. And this is a specimen that was printed by Norman McKnight. He's a printer in Berkeley, California, and so he does own a couple fonts of this typeface. And on the bottom left there, you can see Rhapsody typeface by Ralph M. Unger. That is a digital version of this typeface. And of course, we have Gudrun von Hess, perhaps the most prolific of the bunch. So on the top left there, it's kind of a snapshot of the specimen of Diatema that Leonard C. Stone printed for the project. And on the right-hand side, that is a specimen of Hess Antiqua that was printed by Matt Kelsey at Camino Press in Saratoga, California. And this was letterpress printed from polymer plates. So I'm really excited to show you this one because I think it shows how even if you don't have the metal type, you can still use these type designs to beautiful effect with letterpress printing. And then on the bottom left is Zop von Hess's inline capitals, Smaragd. And then on the bottom right, the swash capitals, Ariadne. And this is the last one. This is Montan by Anna Maria Shieldbach. This was issued by Stempel in 1954. In some ways, this one is my favorite, and I think that's because I feel like I could actually use this one the most. So this one is it's a bold, it's boxy, it's an unadorned sans serif typeface. It's got a very heavy stroke, of course, the same width throughout all the letter forms, and it's an uppercase only typeface. So it's useful for headlines, posters, advertisements. And this was produced in the post-World War II era, and this was a time when, according to Walter Tracy, sans serif typefaces really dominated the typography of the marketplace. And I kind of see this as a modern step when compared toward the other typefaces featured in this project. And this typeface, it did make sort of a brief digital appearance with a design by Carmen Maurer, but it didn't make it onto the market. I do hope that someday someone else will create a digital revival of this. Another thing I will mention is that Rainer Gerstenberg, a type founder in Germany, has the original matrices for this typeface and is able to cast new type. Although I'm not sure how much longer he's going to be operating his business there. So if that's something you want to get, I would say act now. Yeah, I think that this typeface would be really cool on posters or in like a, in a really small size. It could be good for greeting cards and that kind of thing. And that is the end of my presentation. I'll stop sharing my screen. And I will open it up for questions. I see there's already some in the chat here. So did ATF produce Colwell hand letter in a full range of sizes? I think the answer is yes, although that might be a really good question for Randy because I know he has some of the smaller sizes. I just have the 36 point. And the matrices that the Smithsonian has, they do come in a range of sizes, but I think they're mostly on the larger end. But Randy, you definitely have smaller sizes, which you use to print the mini book.
Yeah, I have 8 or 9 cases starting with 6 point.
There you go.
And in just the hand letter up to 24, and then in italic I have 10, 18, and 30. So.
Okay, yeah, and I have a 36 point italic, and I think I remember seeing on the Smithsonian a matrices for something in the 40 range. And Randy, what do you think of the typeface? Do you like it?
I like it, although it's kind of a funny story. Is that we got a call from being a museum press. Met a guy who said, "I got a bunch of stuff in my basement you could have for a price." It turned out, and 2 of us wound up buying everything, even though I started out just to want a type cabinet, and it was kind of a downer that they said, "Well, the type comes with it." And that was the Colwell hand letter. So that's kind of how I got into it. I had really no intention of building an entire press of my own with a lot of type, and I wound up keeping 2 cabinets, selling another 4 full of type, and parsing a lot of the type out and things like that. But yeah, and I have to say, I think I still had the whole collection, and I was, figuring out what to keep and what not to keep. And it was when I saw the notice of, does anybody have this stuff on one of the boards somewhere, that I responded to you, and therefore I kept it. Otherwise, I may not have. Although it's the best, it's the fullest font I have of a serif that works in kind of like for small books and things. So
that's great. Well, I caught you in the nick of time.
Yeah, very much so. Yeah.
It seems
actually,
like
maybe not. Otherwise, it would have been on eBay and you would have found it.
Randy, it seems like the font would lend itself well to maybe the demos that you do.
Yeah, it's and so we have the type at the museum, and then each of us, I think, has our own little private collection. So it's in my private collection, but I would, before I forget it though, the little Thoreau book is something that I printed for a talk that I gave at the Thoreau Society annual gathering in 2019, and we sold them there for a fundraiser, and I actually stopped selling them for a fundraiser so that I'll have enough to give all of Chesapeake Chapter members who come visit us at the field trip we've been planning since COVID.
2 years, yeah.
Yeah, so I still have enough for even a pretty good turnout for that. So
great.
I'll answer Chris's question. So the digital Aaliyah initials are 2-color. They actually have 3 layers. So I'll just make sure I get this right here because I'm not a type designer. So So that design allows the user to layer and add color to specific design objects, such as the ornamental leaves or the white space carved out of the main downstroke, so that inline portion.
Oh.
So, and it's yeah, it's got 3 layers, so you can really play around with it.
Right, which is kind of an interesting thing that's happened to it. It looks like all the metal is strictly single color.
That's right. Yes.
Conceivably, somebody could hand ink it, but wow, that's hard to imagine. But so there's a case where turning it digital actually gave a lot more possibilities. That's interesting.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I mean, if you were using it for its kind of intended function to be, you know, like the first letter of a chapter or something like that, depending on how, you know, extensive your project was, you know, perhaps you could do some of that hand embellishment. It might be something that would really make your piece shine.
Yeah, yeah. After it was printed, you mean kind of do some sort of hand coloring or something? Yeah,
Exactly.
that's
Yeah.
true.
One thing I'll also mention is that typeface was intended to be sort of a companion to Lucian Bernhardt's Schönschrift. It's a script typeface.
Mm-hmm.
So those two kind of go really well together. So if you wanted to use the Schönschrift for kind of like the body text, and then the ballet initials as an ornamental feature. And also there's a digital foundry called Elsner and Flake that has a digital version of that Schönschrift typeface. So you could do that in the digital realm as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, George, thanks for sharing the Elizabeth Friedlander biography. I do have it linked as well in the slides, so which we'll send if anyone wants to follow up on that there. Are there any other questions?
I have to say that for some reason, when I looked at the PDF of your project, I didn't realize how large the folder and specimens were. Those came out really, really nice. I'm glad you showed us that.
Yeah, I can show you again. So they're 9 3/4 inches by 15 1/4. This is the one that Jen Farrell printed.
Yeah.
She just did such an incredible job. But yes, they are frameable.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's the one challenge of digitization, right? That we lose scale. We get access to so much, but you know, pretty much everything, you know, from a sort of, say, heroic French wall-sized battle scene to the Thoreau book, which you know fits in the palm of your hand. On the screen, they're all the same size, right? And so you know that's one of the, we have this access to a world of riches, but at the same time we really lose that sense of the scale, and the scale is so much, it's part of the way we respond aesthetically to things, right? As well as other ways too.
That's such a good point.
It is. I know, I can't remember who I was talking to, but they were mentioning that library that they were connected with was digitizing books, and for the digitization project, it was kind of conceived that you just get one copy of the book, you digitize it, and that's it. And their point was, look, there's a lot more to various editions, printings, and so on, that there's a lot of variation of the same book, so to speak, that unless you digitize all of them, you lose something there.
Yeah, and what, you know, sort of good research institutions will also try to put both a scale and a color code marker beside them, right? Because we also lose some of the, I mean, colors get transformed. Lauren, alongside the project that you were doing, I was supervising a student who was working on medieval manuscripts and parchment, especially what are called offcuts, which are the really scrappy bits, and they're used in sort of the edges of book production and facing the same challenges that you were facing of getting information, but then, and then working during COVID, right, and not having access to, physical things, but dealing with those challenges of digitization. And so on the one hand, you have this opening to a world that even a few years ago was not imaginable to any of us. And then now, but still, because so many people think, oh, one digital copy, but print copies are, if they're not quite as distinctive from one another as manuscript books, they're nevertheless distinctive for all kinds of reasons, and especially when you have the things that come out of traditions of forgery and deceptive colophons and so on, whether we're talking about early sort of books in the religious history of Europe, or whether we're talking about samizdat printing under the old Soviet bloc, or any of these things, right? It's just super interesting.
That's a great point about the color, because that is such an issue. Fortunately, I think the technology is getting much better as far as maintaining and controlling the color, as from the time it's scanned to when it's displayed on our individual computers. So
yeah, well, that's one of the things that Lauren was talking about at the library here. We have really super good scanning people, and they're aware of that. But Lauren, I wanted to ask you a question, sort of, with a couple of exceptions, and this may be just an artifact of what you were able to find out. Most of the type designed by these women is kind of niche use type, right? There's only a few things, the Stam, the Hebrew type, and some of Gudrun Zapp von Hesse's that are kind of more general purpose things. And I wonder if that's a function of the place these women had in the type world, or whether it's something else. And it's just a speculative question, but I'm interested in that.
Yeah, it's a really good point. And, I think that's one of those pieces that I would be thrilled if this research can provide kind of like a jumping off point for that kind of thing. I was thinking about it specifically with Colwell hand letter, because in the specimen that they created, the way that they presented the typeface and the language that they used to describe it was very like feminizing. And, they showed invitations to parties, and they called it delicate and pleasing and that kind of thing. And so I almost was wondering, like, did they go to a woman letterer specifically because they wanted something that would be, useful for those purposes? For those purposes that are kind of related to society and socializing, and yeah.
It also would affect how we might think of using it too. If you're prowling specimen books and things like that, and you come across it and it's framed in this way, particularly if you're just browsing, you might think, oh, well, yeah, just not what I'm interested in. Whereas if you didn't have that, sort of perceptual grid imposed on it, you might look at it and think, oh, I could see some other interesting uses for it. For instance, that's the one that's in the Thoreau little book, right? Exactly. and that, that's such a great, use of, it's hard to think of Thoreau as either a feminist or a feminizing writer, right? So.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, well, he mostly spent most of his time with women, so
yeah.
Women is annoying.
So in that way, it's maybe a good match.
Yeah. But it's a beautiful little book, right? And it's not the kind of thing that type was sort of aimed at, but yet, again, so that's you see the creativity of the people who have got their hands on this type in the shop, right? And getting it there is.
Yeah, and how it's marketed, certainly, like that's one aspect of where these artifacts can end up becoming, having some level of gendering occur to them.
Yeah,
I think you're right. I'm sorry, Randy, go ahead.
I was gonna say that helps explain maybe why it got made. We just had a woman at my age or a few years younger reconnect, and she would have been in high school in the 70s, and she became worked in the printing graphic arts field professionally, and she kind of got there in spite of everything, because she just told me the other week that when she went into the same guidance counselor I had in the mid to early 70s. She said she wanted to be a printer, and he said, no, you can't do that.
Well, and that was the 70s, Randy.
Yeah.
Well, and that's when I was at RIT, and yeah, I mean, School of Printing was, oh, geez, 90% guys at least. And that, yeah, but I think that was about the time that commercial printing, at least, there started to be a shift. And keep in mind, up to that point, and after too, for that matter, it was real common for a guy to go into the family business that was printing, as opposed to, and yeah, daughters wouldn't necessarily be encouraged to take that route even. But I think for the time period that we're talking about here, that certainly you can see somebody, a man working at a type foundry saying, we need something. Yeah, let's find a woman to do this one.
Yeah.
The press we use is from the 1850s, and it was used in a local printing office in the 1890s to 1940s by a guy who started a weekly newspaper. He died a few years after starting it, and it went into his son's name, even though his son was a minor and his wife ran it. So, you just couldn't even put a name on it, which would have been like early 1900s.
Oh, because you wouldn't want to have a woman print something for you.
Right. I mean, it just didn't bear the same weight for some reason.
Geez.
Wasn't
That also just reminds me of something that's relevant to your work, Lauren, now, which is the emergence of sort of advertising in the 19th century, right? And the way that changed graphic design in newspapers and so on. And even though the world of type making and typesetting and so on was male, advertising especially was aimed at women, as it still is, right? As the sort of target spending audience. And so that would be an interesting sort of thing to look at it with something like, say, the Colwell, just that, the way in which certain, again, sort of, I was thinking about the nicheness of some of those things, and it may well be tied to that sort of where printing, the world of printing and the world of marketing overlap, right?
Yes. I mean, you make a really good point, especially related to Colwell, because she started, I would say, like kind of the bulk of a good portion of her lettering career was for advertising. She worked for James Howard Keller's The Varied Industries, and it was an advertising company. And so she hand lettered advertisements for a furniture company called W.K. Cowan's. I sort of skipped over this in my presentation, but it's exactly that example of how advertising and it kind of opened up more opportunities for women at this time.
Yeah.
I was also going to mention one thing that I think one thing that either Chris or Randy was saying reminded me that oh yes, we were talking about how the print shops will be passed down from father to son, and I was gonna mention that most of the women in my study came from either affluent backgrounds or artistic backgrounds. They had families who were artistic, or they had fathers or husbands who were working in, like kind of the printing trades or the book trades. The two kind of exceptions were Colwell. Her father was a farm laborer, and also Galina Andreevna Banakova, who, if my kind of Google translation of Russian serves it, her father was a paramedic. So it's just interesting to note that there is like that family connection, and that is one reason that we can see these women weren't necessarily particularly exceptional designers or any more exceptional than any other woman designer working at those times, but they did have, in many cases, that connection to the industry already.
Yeah, I think that you're right. That was fair. One of our members has been doing work on women who ran newspapers, local newspapers, like Western Maryland, West Virginia area now. during the 19th century, I believe. And often that was the case, is that maybe the newspaper had originally been the man, and of course the woman was doing like huge amounts of the work, the typesetting, and she was an integral part, a really necessary part of but never got any recognition until the husband passed away and she took it over and kept it going.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and the slide in my presentation that has like kind of that list of references of other studies related to this. One of those is bookmaking on the distaff side, and it was published in 1937, I think, and it kind of talks about women's roles in the printing trades and typesetting in particular. So if anyone is interested in women typesetters, that's a good one to look at.
George was the historian at the government printing office here in Washington. George, there were plenty of women working at GPO way back, but doing things like sewing books. Where
feeding
else were
presses? Well, press feeders, which the press feeders were not considered printers. Male press feeders were paid less than the printers were, and obviously female press feeders were paid less than anybody. Then when the government printing office was started in 1861, half the people on the rolls that were acquired from the private concern that the government purchased were women, and most of those were bindery employees. And it wasn't until really way too far into the 20th century before there were women in the apprenticeship and who were actually in the trades. I mean, women could be monotype keyboard operators, but they couldn't cast, and they certainly couldn't run linotype machines until, late 50s, early 60s, probably. Women were never.
Don't you wonder where that came from? Women were too delicate to be around hot metal or something?
Hot lead, yeah, it was a hot lead. And that's that sort of echoes around throughout the industry, that they didn't want women next to pots of hot lead.
Keyboarding. Go ahead.
Oh no, go ahead, Ian.
I was going to say the keyboarding is interesting because that fits with the emergence of women as typists, right? So that labor and it's also analogous to what was happening in the development of computers, where you had women doing a lot of the coding, because coding was seen as sort of like stitching and binding, that kind of thing, right? And it was the men designing the machines, because those early computers were often, you actually had to program them, not at the program level, but at the physical hardware level.
Right.
So,
although interestingly, at the period that was true, at the period that women could be hired as monotype keyboarders, there weren't that many. I mean, because there wasn't anywhere to go. There wasn't any path to advancement, and it was a crappy job. It was a really boring job. But yeah, the apprentice program at GPO turned out several hundred apprentices a year. And in one of the years in the middle of the century, when they had one of the biggest classes, which was 1940, there were 2 women. 3 started, 2 finished. And the other thing about the apprentice class in 1940 is that they were everybody was white, and everybody in the place wasn't. And it's one of these weird places in the history of that institution, because nobody said you can't be in the apprenticeship program because you're a woman or because you're Black. Nobody recruited you if you were a woman or Black. but nobody said you couldn't. But the culture of the apprenticeship was such that, that if you started, you didn't feel like finishing.
Yeah.
It was a boys' club. It was a white boys' club. So yeah, I mean, it wasn't until much later. The only time that women were, I shouldn't go on about GPO, but I mean, the only time that women were actively kept out of the apprenticeship program was right after World War II. And at that point they said, nope, strictly for the returning boys who saved the country.
And why was that? Oh, because
yeah, men needed jobs.
Right.
Yeah, that went far beyond printing. I mean, all the sort of Western countries
Sure.
Had, various kinds of limitations on women's work after the war. After two wars of, women proved themselves right in the factories and so on. The first thing that happened, particularly after the Second World War, is they all got shoved out. And that's the period when we get the invention too of the suburb and the stay-at-home. That's the moving into the world of madmen and that kind of thing.
Right. Well, and the other thing, like in the U.S. government, there were all these women war workers who came into the civil service. And at the end of the war, at the end of the national emergency, their employment was terminated. And it wasn't until 35 years later that they got any sort of, a lot of them took the civil service exams and came back into the government and worked the rest of their careers. Virginia Saunders is one of these people.
Oh, really?
And it wasn't until sometime in the 80s that they got any credit for that work toward their retirement.
Wow. Whoa.
And it was had to be kind of by act of Congress. So I'm going to cut off the recording here unless anybody has any further questions. So not hearing any.
Matt, Matt, did you have a comment?
Something about Soviet block printing that you mentioned, Ian.
Yeah, I was talking about the samizdat printing in the old Soviet bloc, right? And then so I think Matt was making a pun in the
oh yes, that's right. Okay.
In the thing, but yeah, there were a lot of mini books in that era. I was in Poland when it was under martial law, and things like 1984 were in the size of like a cigarette package, so that it could be put inside a cigarette package and you could have it in your shirt pocket or something like that. And we have at the University of Victoria a trans archive and sort of all the literature that was being published in the United States and Canada and so on that was sort of non-normative sexuality was often done in the same way. You had little cigarette package sized books for the same reason, so that these could get past the people who were government officials in the United States, government officials in the Soviet bloc, right, who were trying to interfere with the circulation of those kinds of books. And it was interesting that technology developed independently in two different contexts for subverting things. And so that's another kind of version of the mini book, right? But the mini book this time, not as a sort of specialty item, but actually as like a VPN or something like now to disguise where you are, right?
Right.
Before you turn it off, George, Lauren Elle, I just wanted to thank you so much for doing this for us today.
Absolutely.
It has been so interesting, and your research is just so well done that this has been a treat for us this afternoon.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you so much. Thanks, Randy, for suggesting it, and Chris for inviting me. I really appreciate it. It's, my goal to spread this information as much as possible in whatever way I can. So if anyone sees this and has any more questions or wants information about how I got my resources or what they are, please just email me and I'm happy to share more information.
I had one question. I had thought about it earlier, real quick before we said, are you using any of this now in your work?
Do you mean in my printing work?
Well, I guess, what are you doing now?
Okay, yes. Yeah, so I'm actually working as a research analyst for the provincial government. So I work for the Ministry of Advanced Education and Skills Training as a researcher and a writer. I write for them. So this technically does not play into my work specifically, although I can definitely say that the experience of researching this project has been one of the main reasons why I've been able to succeed in my position now, certainly.
Yeah, I can imagine, and for that matter, the writing, I'm sure, helped you to develop your writing skills as far as your current work. So, and it sounds to me though that you intend to pursue it from your printing side too.
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to get back in the print shop as soon as possible and as much as possible. The place that I print is about an hour away, so it's very special when I get to go there.
It looks kind of nice. It's right close to the water, isn't it? And east of, I mean, excuse me, west of Victoria. So
yes,
I
it's
had to
right in
take
the middle of our beautiful temperate rainforest. It's it's quite stunning.
It's almost in the middle of nowhere, and there's only one road, and it's a very windy road, and the road washes out in the increasingly heavy rains that we've got. So, but it's, yeah, you couldn't imagine like a more idyllic place to work in a print shop than Shirley.
Sounds great.
That's right. And I should give a shout out to Lloyd Bocott, who has, helped me as I've been, because I do it so infrequently. Every time I go, I still need to kind of relearn some of the things. So he's been incredibly helpful and generous with the use of his space there. So yeah, just wanted to give him a shout out.
I got to say that piece that you showed us, the first one, your first printed piece, the design of that is fairly complex. That is not easy to print, and the light type over the solid background. So that's impressive for the first piece.
Thank you. In case you couldn't tell, I don't really do anything halfway. So if I set my mind to something, it's all or nothing.
Yeah.
Great.
Okay.